You ever been fined $500 for parking your own damn truck in your own damn driveway? No? Well, let me tell you, it's the kind of thing that burns a hole through your gut in ways heartburn and a bottle of bourbon can't touch. That morning, the sun in Crestview Heights was already high and mean, a white-hot circle branding the back of my neck as I pushed the mower across Mrs. Henderson's lawn. I was sweating through my work shirt by the time I saw her. Debbie Marshall, the HOA president with the manicured claws and a clipboard gripped like a Bible at an exorcism. She was coming across the street like a woman who just found out someone rearranged her flower beds without asking permission. Her fake smile stuck on like a bumper sticker that refused to peel. She called out to me in that syrupy, sing-song voice that always made my blood pressure spike. "Ethan Caldwell, we need to have a little chat about your vehicle. Now, let me be clear. I've lived in Crestview since I was 9 years old. My daddy helped build half the houses on this block, including ours. I run a landscaping business that keeps most of the neighborhood from turning into a weed parade. My truck is part of that. It's old, sure. The paint's chipped. The bumper's a little rusty. But it runs, and it earns me every dime I got." So I shut off the mower, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and gave her a polite nod that probably looked more like a grimace. "Morning, Debbie." I saw Carlos, my right-hand man, look up from the hedges and shake his head with a kind of warning in his eyes. We both knew the drill. Debbie flipped through her clipboard like she was auditioning for a role as a DMV demon. "I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news," she said, while her smile screamed she was anything but sorry. "Your work truck has been parked in the same spot for over 48 hours. That's a violation of Regulation 17B. Also, it doesn't meet our community's visual standards." Visual standards. That phrase stung worse than the sweat dripping into my eyes. I stared at her for a beat, half hoping she'd just start levitating or combust on the spot. "That's my work truck," I said, slow and calm like I was explaining gravity to a child. "I use it every day. Without it, I can't work. You know that." But Debbie had already shifted into robot mode, shaking her head, that smile frozen like something out of a Stepford movie. "The rules are clear, Ethan. Commercial vehicles must be stored in a garage when not in use. And frankly, that truck is an eyesore. We're trying to maintain a certain image in Crestview Heights." And then she handed me the paper. A bright yellow violation notice, like a traffic ticket designed by a kid with a highlighter fetish. $500. Due in 48 hours. Or else. Now, I'm a man who's eaten humble pie more than once. I've worked 60-hour weeks, busted knuckles fixing mowers with duct tape and prayer, built a business from nothing. But something about that piece of paper, handed to me like I was trash on my own damn lawn, sent a lightning bolt straight down my spine. Still, I kept my voice even. "Debbie, I've been here longer than you have. My folks bought this lot before you even knew what a HOA was. That truck isn't bothering anyone." Her smile went sharp then like a paper cut. "Order benefits us all, Ethan. Perhaps if you'd attended the last HOA meeting, you'd be up to date on the regulations. But you seem to prefer digging in the dirt to participating in your community. Actions have consequences." And that's when I noticed it, the way her eyes flicked toward the sheriff's truck parked 2 houses down. That thing had been sitting there for 2 days, unmoving, windows tinted darker than usual. It had Deputy Lauren Hayes tags, but Lauren never lingered that long. She made her rounds like clockwork, efficient, professional, not the type to babysit a block. But Debbie saw it, and something in her face changed for half a second. A flicker of interest, calculation even, like she wasn't just enforcing rules. She was playing chess. Carlos whistled low when she turned on her heel. "Man," he muttered. "She struts around like she's the villain in a reality show. All that's missing is a soundtrack and a wine glass." I forced a chuckle, but my stomach was tight. She'd already hit me where it hurt. My income, $500, was nearly a week's profit. And that look toward the sheriff's vehicle? It didn't sit right. I knew Lauren. We grew up a block apart. She hated the HOA's nonsense as much as I did. Once got fined for her dog barking during a thunderstorm. No way she was behind this. But the truck, the placement, the timing, something wasn't right. And I wasn't about to roll over. The next morning, I found Debbie in my yard at 6 a.m., measuring the distance from my mailbox to the curb with a tape measure like she was trying to catch NASA-level infractions. She had an envelope tucked under her arm, gold embossed with the words, Summit Crew. I caught a glimpse before she slid it into her bag. I didn't know what Summit Crew was then, but something about it felt oily, like a rat in a business suit. She announced triumphantly that my mailbox was 3 inches too close to the property line. Another violation. I took a long sip of coffee and watched as she stumbled over my garden hose and caught herself on the truck's tailgate. "Careful there," I said, smirking. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself on all this disorder." Her face flushed red. "Your property is dragging down the entire neighborhood's value," she snapped. "This chaos? This equipment? It all has to go." She pulled out her phone and started snapping photos like she was building a legal case against a war criminal. Word spread fast. Within hours, 3 clients canceled. Debbie had gone door to door, whispering in ears, implying that hiring me meant being guilty by association. Carlos and I sat in the truck, calculating numbers. If 2 more people dropped, I wouldn't make rent. Not mortgage, rent. She was trying to kill my business one slow cut at a time. Not with a blade, with whispers and fines. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about a truck. It was about power, control, and fear. Debbie didn't enforce rules. She manufactured them to weaponize compliance. But here's the thing about old dogs like me. We don't forget where the bones are buried. I decided right then, I wasn't going to be her next casualty. I'd fight this, not with fists, but with something stronger. Truth, and maybe a few flamingos. Because if Debbie wanted a war, I was finally ready to bring one. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that the sheriff's truck parked across the street wasn't just a passive observer. And when she reached for that lock a few days later, clipboard swinging like a sword, she wasn't just committing petty trespass. She was about to trigger something much bigger. But that's minute 7. And trust me, minute 7 is where everything starts to explode. So stick with me, because you've probably met a Debbie or 2 in your life. Maybe it was a boss. Maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe it was the HOA rep who said your American flag was too large. But me, I'm here to show you what happens when a man's had enough. And I think you'll like how this one ends. You ever had something you built with your own 2 hands slowly poisoned in front of you? Drop by drop, like someone spitting in your morning coffee every damn day and daring you to say something? That's what it felt like in the days after the $500 ticket. Not just the fine, not just the humiliation of being told my own truck, the lifeblood of my work, didn't fit the image of the neighborhood. No, it was deeper than that. It was waking up each morning to see less and less of what I'd worked so hard to build. It was the sound of silence where customers used to call. It was losing grip inch by inch while still smiling at folks who looked away just a little too quickly. See, I've run Caldwell Lawn and Landscape for almost 15 years. Started it with a rusted-out push mower I picked up at a yard sale. Grew it one job at a time. Word of mouth. Sweat equity. And the neighbors, back then, they liked a man who worked with his hands. They'd wave, say thank you, slip me a 6-pack during the holidays. But those days were fading. Or maybe they were being scrubbed out. Quietly. Strategically. And leading the cleanup crew was Debbie Marshall with that fake smile and her army of printed bylaws. 3 days after the ticket, I got a voicemail from the Vintners, longtime clients, sweet couple in their 70s. Said they'd be canceling their lawn service. No real reason given. Just that things were getting too tense lately and they wanted to keep a low profile. I knew exactly what that meant. Debbie had gotten to them. And sure enough, when I drove past their house the next day, I spotted a brand new sign in their yard. Proud HOA supporter. Just like that. Another domino down. I'd barely had time to process it when 2 more clients followed suit. One via email, short and polite. The other left a folded note taped to my front gate. "We appreciate everything, but we've decided to handle the yard ourselves. Thanks for understanding." I didn't. Not really. I understood fear, though. Debbie had these people under her thumb. She didn't need to yell or threaten. All she had to do was suggest, gently, that associating with troublemakers might have consequences. Like your garage door being scrutinized for aesthetic violations, or your son's skateboard leaving marks on community property. Fear does the rest. By the end of the week, I'd lost 5 contracts. That's about a third of my local business. It meant I was dipping into my truck fund just to keep gas in the tank and Carlos on payroll. I sat with him at the edge of the job site, staring down at a patch of dead grass like it held answers. "We can't keep bleeding like this," I said. Carlos, ever the loyal one, just nodded and said, "We either plug the hole or blow the damn ship up." He had a way with words. That night I went digging. Not in the yard, not in the dirt, I went digital. Pulled up public HOA meeting minutes, scanned real estate transfer reports, old newsletters. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Not at first. But something kept nagging me. That envelope I saw tucked under Debbie's arm, the one labeled Summit Crew. It hadn't been just some newsletter. And as I looked closer, it started to connect. Turns out, Summit Crew was a consultancy firm operating in suburban developments, especially those under HOA management. Their specialty? Community revitalization through strategic asset management. That's a lot of fancy words for what really looked like neighborhood flipping. They'd quietly buy homes, especially those belonging to longtime owners who were late on dues or in minor code violation hell. And how did they get those owners to sell? Well, they had help. From the inside. From people who knew which properties were vulnerable. People like Debbie. Debbie wasn't acting alone. She was executing a playbook. Pressure. Isolate. Violate. Fine. Repeat. Get folks so tired, so bogged down with HOA nonsense, that they'd throw in the towel and move out. Then Summit Crew swoops in, buys cheap, renovates, raises prices, and pats themselves on the back for elevating community standards. It wasn't just corruption. It was calculated, legal, clean, and evil. I started talking to folks. Not the ones still showing up at the HOA meetings with their baked goods and forced cheer. I mean the ones like me. The ones who'd been here for decades. Folks who remembered when the HOA was just a couple of neighbors organizing a potluck, not a ruling council. I found Hank Reynolds, 74, retired firefighter. Said he got hit with a $900 fine last year for unauthorized gutter color. The man's gutters were white, but apparently they weren't approved white. Then there was Louise, widow, 67. Had a rose garden so pretty it got featured in the County Gazette. Debbie fined her for invasive species. Turned out one of her bushes was a non-native hybrid. Planted 10 years before Debbie even moved in. Louise eventually sold her house and moved into a condo. Guess who bought her old place? Summit Crew. Renovated it into a chrome and glass nightmare. Doubled the value. HOA took the credit. I was starting to see the pattern. And I was getting angrier by the hour. Now, I've been mad before. I've thrown wrenches. I've kicked mower blades. But this was different. This was slow burn, righteous fury. The kind you feel in your bones. The kind you know you have to do something about or it'll eat you alive. So I fought back the only way I could think to. I made noise. I started a blog, Crestview Truth. Wrote about the fines, the cancellations, the trends. Shared stories from people like Hank and Louise. I didn't name names, at least not at first. I just connected dots. Asked questions. Highlighted patterns. And I shared everything on Nextdoor, Facebook groups, even left flyers at coffee shops. People started paying attention. And that's when I knew I'd rattled the cage. 2 nights later, my truck got egged. Not just egged. Scratched too. Someone keyed trash into the side panel. Carlos saw it before I did and wouldn't let me see till he'd tried to wipe it off. But I did see, and I felt it in my chest like a punch. That wasn't random. That was personal. The next morning, Debbie was out walking her dog. The purebred, surgically perfect Pomeranian named Winston. She smiled at me like nothing had happened. "Oh dear," she said, eyeing the truck. "Such a shame. Crime's really on the rise lately." I wanted to grab that stupid clipboard and snap it in half. But I smiled, big and fake. And I said, "Maybe I'll have to install some cameras. Wouldn't want to miss any neighborhood activity." She nodded like I was a fool and walked off. But that was the moment I knew I had her worried. Because people like Debbie? They don't like the light. They rule through shadows and whispers. And I was pulling back the curtains. Then came the real twist. At the next HOA meeting, one I decided to attend just to stir the pot, I brought a folder. Inside were photos of Summit Crew renovations, records of property purchases, copies of complaint letters from residents, all annotated with dates and HOA fine notices. I stood during the open forum and asked a simple question. Can someone explain why 70% of homes fined for major violations over the past year were later purchased by one company? The room went quiet. Debbie stammered. Someone coughed. And then I smiled again, only this time it was real. Because I wasn't just the guy with the truck anymore. I was the guy who had receipts. And somewhere, deep in the back of the room, I saw a man I didn't recognize shift in his seat, glance at Debbie, and slip out the door without a word. That's when I realized Summit Crew wasn't done yet. That was just phase 1. And if they thought I was going down without a fight, they were about to learn something old-fashioned and important. Some of us may be past 60, but we don't go quietly. We've been through wars, built families, buried friends, lived through fire and funerals and the damn Cold War. You think we're scared of a clipboard? Hell no. You push a man like me far enough and you won't just get a blog post. You'll get a revolution. And I was just getting started. I wasn't planning to become the neighborhood's most wanted man. But life has a funny way of pushing you straight into the fire when all you wanted was a little shade. Started with a truck. Then it spread like rust on a shovel, quiet, slow, but deadly. Debbie Marshall had turned Crestview Heights into her personal kingdom, and I was now the lone outlaw refusing to kneel. That wasn't just inconvenient for her. It was unacceptable. And that's when things went from bad to biblical. It was early Monday when I found the first one. A single plastic flamingo planted dead center on my lawn. Bright pink, ugly as sin, with a handwritten sign dangling from its neck that read, HOA violator. I stood there with my coffee still hot in one hand and my patience dying in the other. Carlos pulled up in his truck, saw the flamingo, and said, "Damn, man, they're sending you hate mail in lawn decor now." But I wasn't laughing. This wasn't just some prank. It was bait. A message. Someone wanted me to react. So I didn't. I left it there. And the next day there were 5 more. All in a row. Marching toward my porch like a little pink army of HOA goons. People walking their dogs stopped to stare. Some smirked. Some looked nervous. But I knew this move. I recognized it from high school. Public ridicule. Social pressure. Humiliate until they comply. It was Debbie's MO wrapped in plastic smiles. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. I was tired of dodging. So I did what any stubborn bastard with a sense of humor and a Wi-Fi connection would do. I went viral. I made a sign, big and bold, free lawn art, no HOA permission needed. I lined up the flamingos in choreographed formation, complete with sunglasses and mini protest signs. Carlos helped me set up a lawn chair and snap a photo. I posted it on the community group with the caption, "Flamingos for Freedom. Donations accepted in beer." It blew up. Within a day, I had folks messaging me for their own flamingos. Someone dropped off a dozen more in support. The vintners even sent me a text, just a photo of their yard with 2 pink birds and a thumbs up. I laughed for the first time in weeks. But Debbie? She didn't laugh. She stormed up to my yard 2 days later with her clipboard like it was a loaded weapon and snapped pictures like she was building a criminal case. I sipped my coffee and said, "Careful, Debbie. These birds are protected by the First Amendment and flamingo law." She didn't even blink. Just handed me another notice, this time for unauthorized signage. But what she didn't know, what made my day entirely, was that Carlos had been recording the whole thing from across the street. The video once again made the rounds. It showed Debbie, red in the face, trying to yank one of the flamingos from the ground before slipping and falling on her backside. The internet had no mercy. Someone looped the fall to music. Within hours, she was a meme. But while I was enjoying the minor victory, something darker was brewing. That same afternoon, I got an email from a throwaway account. No subject, no signature, just a photo. It showed Debbie, standing in what looked like a kitchen, talking to a man in a dark suit. On the counter behind them was a folder clearly marked Summit Crew Acquisition Plan Phase 2. My gut clenched. I zoomed in. There were names on the sheet, property addresses. Mine was on it. So were 6 others I recognized, all owned by people who'd complained, resisted, or just hadn't paid dues fast enough. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about punishing me. It was a sweep. Debbie was helping Summit Crew prep the neighborhood for a purge. Total turnover. Bring in investors, boot the originals. Clean house, literally. So I dug deeper. I called in a favor from my nephew Kyle, who works IT for a local security company. I showed him the email. He traced the IP. It came from within the neighborhood. Kyle couldn't say who sent it, but he narrowed it down to one of 8 homes. Someone was on the inside. Someone was trying to help me. That night, as I was staring out the window, sipping cheap whiskey and wondering how the hell I was going to protect my home from a corporate land grab, I noticed a figure walking toward the sheriff's truck parked near the corner. It had been there all week, unmoved. I always assumed it was just part of their routine patrol rotation. But now something felt off. The figure was Debbie. She walked right up to the driver's side and tried to open the door. Then she pulled out something, maybe a key, maybe a lockpick, and fiddled with the handle. The truck didn't budge. She looked around, clearly nervous, and tried again. That's when the flash went off. A camera hidden somewhere triggered. Debbie jumped like she'd touched a live wire. Within seconds, lights came on. The sheriff herself, Lauren Hayes, stepped out from the bushes, badge out, hand on her hip. Debbie froze. I couldn't hear what was said, but it didn't take a lip reader to know this wasn't a misunderstanding. Debbie had tried to break into a police vehicle. Why? Maybe to plant something. Maybe to snoop. Whatever it was, she got caught red-handed. Lauren cuffed her right there, calm and methodical, like she'd been waiting for this moment. The next morning, I got a knock on the door. It was Lauren. She looked tired but resolute. "You were right," she said simply. "Summit Crew's been working with Debbie to target properties. We've been building a case for months. That truck? It was bait." I didn't know what to say. Relief, rage, vindication, all of it mixed in my chest like gasoline. Lauren handed me a flash drive. Inside this is footage, copies of emails, proof. Use it however you want, but be smart. They're not just after you. She didn't need to say more. I got it. The fight wasn't over. Debbie was just the pawn who got sloppy. Summit Crew was still out there, watching, waiting, adjusting. But for now, the kingdom had no queen, and the pink flamingos stood tall. And me? I'd just begun sharpening my shovel. There's a kind of silence that comes after a storm. Not the peaceful kind, not the kind you enjoy on your porch with a cold beer and a sigh of relief, but the sharp, unnatural quiet that tells you the fight isn't over, it just went underground. That's what Crestview Heights felt like after Debbie Marshall got hauled off in handcuffs. People stopped waving. Sidewalk chats vanished. The HOA newsletters got shorter and colder. But nobody asked questions, not out loud. Like the whole street had entered some witness protection program for their own opinions. And me? I wasn't celebrating. I was preparing. Because if Debbie was bold enough to try unlocking a sheriff's bait truck, it meant Summit Crew had her desperate. And desperation is only the beginning when you're dealing with people who wear suits like armor and hide behind LLCs. 3 days after Debbie's arrest, I found an envelope duct-taped to my front door. No stamp, no address, just my name in blocky red marker, underlined twice. Inside was a single typed note. "Walk away. Not worth it. Some houses are meant to be burned down, not saved." That kind of message doesn't scare me. Not really. But it sure as hell pissed me off. Carlos, ever the optimist, said it might have been a joke. But I knew better. I've seen threats before, during the union fights back in '82, during my father's zoning battles in this very neighborhood. This had the smell of corporate muscle, dressed up like a casual warning. I held the letter over my stovetop and let it catch flame, watched it curl and blacken, and thought, all right, let's dance. Now that Debbie was gone, HOA meetings weren't led by her anymore, but the board hadn't disbanded. They shuffled a new face in front, Gregory Langford, a man so bland he could be mistaken for a loading screen. He was polite, soft-spoken, wore navy polos like a uniform, but his eyes had that same glint Debbie had when she was calculating how to gut you with bureaucracy. At the next meeting, he opened with a speech about restoring peace and professionalism to the community. But the new agenda buried the real bombshell. They proposed an emergency bylaw amendment. Any homeowner under active violation investigation would be ineligible to vote in HOA elections or speak during open forums. Translation: they were trying to shut me up permanently. I stood up anyway, and I didn't shout. I didn't rage. I simply asked one question: when did community service become a cover for asset control? Dead silence followed. Langford shifted in his seat. One of the other board members, Dana Schultz, Debbie's longtime ally, looked down at her papers like they were suddenly written in Greek. I pressed on, because I got a copy of Debbie's emails. I've seen the internal summit memos. You folks weren't preserving a neighborhood. You were prepping it for sale. And the rest of us? We were just square footage waiting to be flipped. Carlos filmed it from the back row. I posted the footage that night. By morning, it had 20,000 views. Local news started circling. And just like that, the silence broke. But not in the way I'd hoped. Someone slashed the tires on both my work truck and Carlos' van. Same night. No cameras caught it, but the message was clear. You want to make noise? Fine. But it's gonna cost you. So I changed the locks. Bought motion sensor lights. Had a neighbor who used to be Navy SEAL help me rig a driveway alert system. You'd think we were preparing for a siege. Maybe we were. The real turn came when I decided to walk into the lion's den. Summit Crew's name had always floated like fog. Always mentioned, never present. But I found a lead through a real estate listing. A recently flipped home 3 blocks over was now listed by Summit Properties Group, a shadow company of Summit Crew. I booked a viewing under a fake name. Carlos came with me, dressed like a bored cousin from out of town. The agent who showed up wasn't local. Sharp suit, accent too clean, smile too still. She introduced herself as Rebecca, no last name, said she was filling in temporarily. But the moment she saw my face, that mask cracked. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, calm as death. "We hoped you'd stop by eventually." She knew who I was. That meant they'd been watching. Inside the house was sterile, renovated to death. Granite countertops, gray walls, zero soul. It wasn't meant to be lived in, it was meant to be photographed, sold, flipped again. I wandered to the kitchen and saw it. On the counter, half tucked under a folder marked Phase 3 Rollout. A spreadsheet. It listed addresses, including mine. Status: pending legal acceleration. I snapped a photo while Rebecca faked a phone call. I had my proof. More than that, I had confirmation they weren't done. Phase 1 had been Debbie. Phase 2 was Langford. But Phase 3? That was takeover. I left that house knowing the gloves were off. The next morning, 2 code enforcement officers showed up at my door. Said they received an anonymous complaint about hazardous equipment and visible chemical containers. They poked around, found nothing. But they wrote up a preliminary notice anyway. Said it was standard procedure. Standard my ass. That same afternoon, I saw Langford getting into a black sedan 2 blocks away. The driver? The same Rebecca. The game wasn't subtle anymore. It was open season. But here's the thing about men like me, we've got something these corporate raiders don't understand. We've got community. Real community. Not the plastic kind you write checks for, but the kind that remembers birthdays, mows lawns for sick neighbors, and watches your house when you're at the VA clinic. I started gathering people. Quietly. The old-timers, the young couples who bought here before the market exploded. The veterans, the ones Debbie fined for flower pots and Halloween lights. We started calling ourselves the Heights Holdouts. Just a dozen at first, then 2 dozen, then more. We met in garages, at tailgates, on porches. We printed flyers, we organized. We talked strategy. Carlos suggested the one thing none of us thought we'd ever do: run for the HOA board ourselves. But if the bylaws were locking me out, Someone else had to step in. Enter Marlene Ross, age 68, retired nurse, former choir director, and one hell of a firecracker. She agreed to run. And the night she announced her candidacy, someone spray-painted communist across her garage door. She called me laughing, said, "Hell, if that's the worst they got, I must be doing something right." It was no longer about me or my truck or the fines. It was about control, who had it and who deserved it. Summit crew had underestimated something critical. They thought we were all isolated, scared, compliant. But the more they pushed, the more we pushed back. And we weren't backing down. On the first day of early voting, Langford sent out a mass email warning of dangerous misinformation campaigns threatening community cohesion. We sent out our own pictures of Debbie's emails, Summit's property lists, the photos I took inside that flip house. We didn't need a smear campaign. We had facts. Real, ugly, undeniable facts. And just when I thought we might be turning the tide, I got another envelope. No note this time. Just a single photo. Me, standing outside my house. Time-stamped. Dated. Taken the night before. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. We see you. But you know what? Good. Because I see you too. And I'm not moving. I'm not selling. I'm not giving up. You want this neighborhood? You're gonna have to come through every pink flamingo, every old-timer, every beat-up truck and cracked sidewalk and porch swing we've got. We built this place. We'll die before we watch you take it. I always thought that when justice finally shows up, it'd feel like the end of a long war. Like stepping off the battlefield and lighting a cigar with your boots still muddy, breathing deep like a man who outlasted the worst. But let me tell you something most folks won't. Justice doesn't feel like victory. Not when you realize the fight you just won was only the first hill, and the bastards on the next ridge have bigger guns and better lawyers. Debbie going down? That was a win, sure. But when Langford resigned quietly 1 week after our Heights holdouts, meeting drew 50 people into a garage lit by bug zappers and coffee breath, I knew something wasn't right. Too clean. Too quick. The silence came back, but this time it had money behind it. It started with the mail. Flyers began showing up. Slick, glossy ones. Announcing the launch of Crestview Future Initiative. Promises of beautification, new parks, smart neighborhood technology, and a higher tier of homeowner. That last part stuck with me like a thorn. Higher tier. What the hell did that mean? Nobody listed as a sponsor. No return address. Just a QR code that led to a site owned by New Horizon Urban Holdings LLC. But when Carlos checked the back-end domain registry, it all funneled back to one name. Summit Crew. Like roaches, they scattered after a light, only to regroup somewhere darker. And now they weren't hiding behind Debbie. They'd put on a new face. Polished, professional, maybe even legal this time, but the rot underneath smelled the same. Then the property offers started rolling in. At first, they were subtle. Anonymous interest letters offering above-market prices for homes on certain blocks. Then came the door knocks. Friendly young men and women in branded polos, offering relocation packages to longtime residents. Some of our older folks, tired and confused, were tempted. Hell, who wouldn't be? They made it sound like a gift. Move closer to your grandkids, they'd say. Cash out before the market dips. It was charming, strategic, and it was surgical. Every single target had either signed the petition against HOA overreach or attended a holdouts meeting. This wasn't a business offer. It was removal, quiet exile. We tried to fight with facts, with logic. We posted the connections online. We called the county office, tried to halt permits. But these people, they had every document in order. Zoning? Cleared. Construction? Pre-approved. Funding? Backed by investment firms with names that sounded like they belonged in DC. Every time we filed a complaint, we got a polite letter back saying everything was under review, which we all knew meant you've already lost. Then the first home caved. Old Mr. Donahue, a retired teacher who used to lead the 4th of July parade with an American flag duct-taped to his walker, sold his house. Packed up and left in the middle of the night. No goodbye, just gone. Carlos found him a week later in a senior apartment across town. Said they made him sign paperwork he didn't fully understand. That someone from the HOA had told him his home was under legal risk if he stayed. He didn't have the strength to fight. I just wanted peace, he said. And that's how they win, isn't it? Not with fists but with fatigue. They grind you down till the thought of standing up feels heavier than surrender. I knew then that our front porch politics and memes weren't going to cut it anymore. This wasn't about flamingos or lawn codes. It was systemic, strategic, and far bigger than just one neighborhood. We needed something bigger too, something with teeth. So I called in an old favor. Back when I worked city groundskeeping in the 90s, I helped a guy named Eddie Barnes cover his tail when he lost a city plow. Eddie now works for the local news station. Night desk, but connected. I handed him everything. The summit memos, the buyer records, photos from inside their flip properties, recordings of their ambassadors offering hush money. At first, Eddie was hesitant. Too local, he said. Too soft for prime time. But then I showed him the spreadsheet. Not the one from last time. A new one. A leaked doc from someone inside Summit. God bless that anonymous envelope left in my mailbox. It listed targeted communities, not just ours. 12 neighborhoods, 3 states, hundreds of homes. All listed as Phase 3 asset clearance. That got Eddie's attention. He promised me a segment. Said, if this is true, they're not just flipping homes. They're flipping entire zip codes. The news story aired 2 weeks later. Not a headliner, just a 4-minute piece buried in the evening run. But it hit harder than we expected. Phones started ringing. People from other counties reached out. Similar complaints. Similar tactics. One guy in Georgia said his HOA mysteriously merged with a development group 6 months ago, and now he's one fence panel away from a lien. A woman in Arizona swore a Summit rep forged signatures to gain board control. We weren't just a case. We were a template. Of course, Summit fought back. They launched their own PR campaign, calling the story dangerous misinformation fueled by disgruntled locals and anti-growth conspiracy theorists. I laughed at that. Disgruntled locals? Sure. But conspiracy theorists? Hell, I've still got VHS tapes and a landline. I'm no keyboard warrior. I just don't like being stolen from with a smile. Then, just when it felt like the pressure might finally turn in our favor, the biggest blow came. My house was vandalized. Not graffiti. Not slashed tires. This time it was fire. Someone tossed a Molotov into my shed. Lit up everything: tools, blueprints, signs, decades of work. Fire department got there fast enough to save the house. But the message wasn't subtle anymore. This was war. Sheriff Hayes came by the next morning. She didn't say much, just looked at the ashes and muttered, "They're getting reckless." I asked her if we could connect the fire to Summit. She shook her head. No proof. Not yet. But I've seen enough to know they want you out, Ethan. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Carlos. Neither did half the block. Then came the twist. Marlene Ross, our firecracker HOA candidate, remember her? She got a visit from a man claiming to be an attorney for a private housing initiative. Said if she withdrew her name from the ballot, they'd expedite renovations on her late husband's VA claim property and even offer her a board advisory seat in their new community outreach program. She laughed in his face and slammed the door. Then she cried for 2 hours. Said her husband died in that house and he'd want her to fight, not sell out. That's when I knew she was the real deal. The next HOA vote drew more people than we'd seen in years. Maybe ever. Folks brought lawn chairs, coolers, flags. Felt like a protest picnic. We voted. Loudly. And when the dust settled, the new board was 4-1 in favor of the holdouts. We passed a motion the same night to terminate all partnerships with external development entities, froze new construction permits, and filed a cease and desist against Summit crew pending formal investigation. It wasn't a full win. They still owned property here, still had lawyers, but the tide had turned. A week later, I found another envelope under my truck windshield. No threat this time, just a typed note, clean and plain. Impressive. We'll see you in Phase 4. No name, no signature. But I knew. The war wasn't over. It was just evolving. But here's the thing they don't get. We're not developers. We're not corporate. We're not transient. We are stubborn, anchored, beat up but rooted. We are veterans, builders, mechanics, teachers, widows, grandfathers. We are the people who remember what this country looked like before everything got outsourced, before every neighborhood came with a branding guide and a mission statement. We're not for sale. So let M come. Let M roll out Phase 4 with their pamphlets and polo shirts. We've got lawn chairs, thermoses, and stories that go back generations. We've got pink flamingos and ash in our fingernails. We've got scars, and we've earned every damn one of them. And most of all, we've got each other. That's what they'll never understand. That's what they'll never be able to buy.